A few months ago, my life still followed a steady rhythm. No major events, no significant disruptions, just days passing in near identical repetition. I worked night shifts at a shipping warehouse from 8 p.m. to around 4 a.m. This meant living an inverted cycle for most people. While others prepared for bed, I was just starting my day. And when the sun rose, I closed my eyes. It was strange, but I'd grown accustomed to it. Even on days off, I maintained this sleep schedule to keep my body from rebelling. It felt like living in another world, a quieter, slower world where little happened in the early hours. Perhaps that very emptiness had been what made me feel safe all this time. That morning, I left work slightly earlier than usual. The rain hadn't fallen yet, but the air hung thick with humidity. A thin mist still clung to the streets. The roads were utterly deserted. Not a single car passed during my entire commute. Even the streetlights seemed sparse, as if the city had deliberately sunk itself into deeper slumber. When I reached my house, something immediately caught my eye. A car, black, old, and visibly worn, parked motionless by the roadside, right beside my driveway. No lights on, no illumination from within. Its windows were completely blacked out by dark tint, so dark I couldn't tell if anyone sat inside. At first I slowed my car, watching through the windshield. Then I turned into the garage and parked. But thoughts about that car wouldn't fade. I sat frozen in my vehicle for several moments, staring out through the rearview mirror. My house stood in a quiet suburban neighborhood, few homes around, each spaced generously apart. Normally, visitors would park right in front of their destination, plenty of empty curb space available. Yet this car had stopped directly across from my house, as if wanting neither closeness nor distance, but some precise middle ground. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just someone visiting a neighbor who couldn't find closer parking. Maybe they were only stopping briefly. Maybe just a food delivery driver taking a break between orders. Yet that uneasy feeling persisted. A small, indistinct sensation I couldn't quite explain, like something was out of place. I entered the house, turned on all the lights, and attempted to continue my morning routine, removing shoes, washing hands, sitting briefly in the living room before finally heading upstairs to my bedroom. From my bedroom window, I stole one last glance outside. The car remained there, motionless. Still no lights, no movement. I eventually fell asleep. When I woke near dusk, the sun slumped westward. The sky yellowed, and birdsong trickled through the window. I went downstairs, drew the living room curtains, and looked out. The car was gone. No trace, no sound, no proof it had ever existed. And though the day passed normally, meal prepping, email checks, some TV before my next work shift, I knew one thing lingered. Not on the road or in the dirt, but in my mind. That black car's silhouette, motionless in darkness, as if waiting for something. Or someone. The next night unfolded no differently than before. Dark skies, empty roads, that distinctive pre-dawn chill in the air. I drove home from work as usual, my body dragging with extra fatigue, perhaps knowing this was my last shift before days off. My mind held just one goal: get home, clean up, sleep. The commute passed smoothly. No red lights, no other cars. Yet moments from home, that strange feeling I'd dismissed yesterday resurged, sharper, more insistent this time. The car had returned. The same car, black, aged, and motionless, parked precisely where it had been the previous night, as if it had never left. Its windows remained tightly sealed, swallowing all surrounding light. No reflections from within, no shapes or silhouettes discernible, just void. I slowed my car further this time as I approached home, my eyes locked onto the foreign vehicle, punting for even microscopic details. But nothing had changed. It looked identical to yesterday, appearing empty, yet somehow staring back. I pulled into the garage, then sat motionless behind the wheel. Silence, too silent. No cricket chirps, no wind rustling through trees. The air hung thick and suffocating. For the first time, I stepped out of the garage and crept toward the end of my driveway. The dim streetlight provided just enough visibility, but couldn't dispel the shadows writhing in my mind. As I edged closer, I caught it, just for a split second, a flicker of movement inside the car. The distinct jerk of the head turning away. A trick of the light? A reflection? I froze mid-stride, planted 3 meters from the vehicle, eyes drilling into its tinted windows. No follow-up movement, no sound, only that oppressive stillness. My courage failed me. I couldn't close the distance further. From my safe zone, I snapped a photo of the license plate with trembling hands. Paranoia? Perhaps, but some deep survival instinct screamed to preserve evidence, just in case. Frame captured, I began retreating backward, never turning my back until the house swallowed me whole. An hour passed before I peered out the second-floor window again. The car had vanished. Like before, it appeared and disappeared without trace, without sound, slithering away in the night silence. And like before, I could only speculate about its occupant, and more disturbingly, why they kept returning here. I tried distracting myself, throwing together a meal and blaring the TV, but my focus never fully returned. My eyes kept darting to the window, not because anything moved outside, but from the creeping certainty that something unnameable was drawing nearer. Not physically, more like a presence, like invisible eyes observing from the void. That night, I slept with all the lights on. My day off should have been the calmest point of the week. No alarms, no schedules, and crucially, no reason to leave home. I woke around 6 p.m. as darkness swallowed the sky. Chilly air from the vent kept me curled under blankets for extra minutes. After rising, I followed my simple routine, drinking water, cracking the window briefly, checking my phone, then pulling on a light jacket. On nights like this, I usually took neighborhood walks. Not for exercise, just to keep my body moving and my mind clear. That night was no different. When I stepped outside, the streets lay empty, no cars at all, including the black one. For a moment, relief washed over me. Maybe it had all been paranoia. Maybe coincidences happened. Maybe that car's owner simply chose the same spot 2 nights running. But 1 hour later, returning from my walk, the car had reappeared. Again, the same vehicle, the same spot, as if waiting for my return. I halted at the driveway's edge, chest tightening as I stared. The night wind seemed to hold its breath. My footsteps slowed as I approached, bolder this time, driven by a need to know. I positioned myself beside the driver's window, pressing my hands against the glass to form a light-blocking tunnel with my palms. Peered inside. Empty. No occupants, no suspicious objects, no signs of life, not even trash or personal items. The car was sterile, too sterile, making its presence even more alien. I observed it for a full minute before retreating indoors. This endless suspicion had exhausted me. No crime committed, no laws broken, just wrongness. And wrongness wasn't actionable. The moment I entered, I grabbed my phone from the nightstand. I'd left it behind during my walk. Now its screen showed an unusual alert. Home security motion detected. I have 4 cameras, 1 facing the front door, 3 indoors, living room, kitchen, bedroom. The exterior camera rarely activates, only triggering when someone stands directly at the entrance. But the app didn't specify which camera had recorded the movement. Just one 60-second clip. I opened the footage. For the first 50 seconds, nothing. Empty rooms, dim nightlights, no sound, no movement. I nearly closed the app, assuming a glitch, maybe a bug or light anomaly. Then in the final 5 seconds, something streaked across the bottom frame. Not a shadow, not a reflection, but something, the crown of a head and a shoulder, sliding screen left to right. Too fast to identify, yet clear enough to spike my pulse. This was my bedroom camera, and I was watching it while standing in that very room. I lowered the phone slowly. My hands trembled. Rotating carefully, I scanned every corner. Nothing, no sound, yet the air had thickened, as if an invisible presence watched from uncharted space. Without thinking, I bolted for the door, but 3 steps into the hallway, I heard it behind me, a faint sound, like fabric brushing drywall. Then footsteps, fast, heavy. Someone was inside the house. I didn't look back, just ran. The staircase ahead stretched impossibly far. Each step through the hallway dragged as if time itself clutched at my limbs. Yet somehow I reached the ground floor and bolted straight for the front door. No time for shoes, no time for belongings. I burst outside barefoot into the night. The cold night air stabbed my skin. I sprinted toward the small woods behind the house, not because it was safe, but because it was closest. Branches and leaves lashed at my exposed flesh, but I kept running until my lungs burned and my legs failed. Finally, I collapsed behind a thick bush, my hiding place trembling with each gasp, and dialed 911 with shaking fingers. The police arrived in what felt like geological time, though the clock claimed only 20 minutes. By then, the car had vanished, but I still had the license plate photo. It didn't take long. 3 hours later, they apprehended someone on the city outskirts. A young man, mid-20s perhaps, his face blank. No reaction to questioning. On his phone, officers found photos of my house, shot through windows while I sat in the living room, a journal documenting my work schedule for the past fortnight. The inexplicable part? No evidence of how he had entered that night. No broken locks, no forensic traces, no camera footage of intrusion, and no one could confirm if this was his first time inside. The sky had darkened since dusk, and the rain hadn't truly stopped since noon. Droplets struck the windshield in a slow, insistent rhythm, tracing watery paths under the faint glow of streetlights. He was accustomed to nights like this, lonely, damp, and uncertain. Storms like this always turned the city into a ghost town. Empty streets, shops closing early, almost no passengers needing rides. Yet he stayed out. The car was his workspace, and waiting was part of the job. He turned on the heater and leaned back into the seat, pulling up YouTube on his phone. The video's audio became background noise beneath the rain. The clock read 9:15 p.m. Nearly 2 hours parked outside this quiet convenience store. Only 1 or 2 cars had passed by, probably night shift workers heading home late. He stretched, feeling the stiffness in his neck, then switched from videos to music, old familiar songs meant to soothe but not loud enough to fully chase away sleepiness. His stomach growled with hunger. He started the engine and slowly pulled out of the parking spot, navigating the wet roads to the nearest fast food restaurant. At the drive-thru, he ordered a burger and black coffee before returning to the exact same parking space. His left hand rested on the steering wheel while his right held a steaming coffee cup. The food remained untouched. Outside, the rain continued falling, now even heavier than before. When the notification finally arrived, his phone vibrated softly on the center console. An unknown username. The pickup location displayed on screen, about 25 minutes toward the outskirts, in an area he barely recognized. The destination? Another 20 minutes further in the opposite direction, farther from downtown. Normally he'd refuse such a distant fare, especially in weather like this, but not tonight, not after waiting so long with nothing to show for it. He pressed accept, took a deep breath, shifted gears, and began navigating the streets. On his phone screen, the route materialized, a long blue line cutting through dark, seldom traveled areas. The car accelerated away from the silent town. The rain erased everything, tire tracks, streetlights, even the illusion of safety. But he was just a driver doing his job, and the night stretched endlessly before him. The drive to the pickup point unfolded in heavy silence. The car radio played softly, but the announcer's voice and music were drowned out by torrential rain hammering the roof and windshield. Roads lay empty, city lights growing scarcer with each kilometer. Buildings gradually gave way to vacant lots, fields, and trees lining both sides like endless dark walls. He checked the Uber app on his dashboard-mounted phone again. The destination remained unchanged, an unnamed rural intersection he didn't recognize. The GPS signal flickered intermittently, making the route lines stutter across the screen. Questions swirled. Who would need a ride this far out? In weather like this? But there was no time to reconsider. He'd come too far. Just 10 more minutes. The headlights swept across the narrow, waterlogged road. Ahead, a rusted street sign flashed briefly in the beams before disappearing back into the mist. When he finally reached the marked location, he braked slowly, verifying his position. No houses, no lights, no sounds except the rain. Just an empty clearing and motionless towering trees. He waited. The first minute passed. No one came. Squinting through the rain, he scanned the tree line, only blurred shapes. He activated hazard lights and tapped his phone to confirm arrival. Began typing. Hello? I'm at the location. Where are you? His thumb hovered over send when movement flickered in the side mirror. A figure approached from behind the car, soundless but for the rain. The man opened the rear door and slid inside, seating himself centrally, perfectly framed in the rearview mirror. Water streamed from his jacket onto the upholstery, not a word spoken. The driver glanced back, suppressing his startle. You ordered the Uber? The man simply nodded, then stated his name, matching the app's display. His voice was low and measured, nearly swallowed by the rain. No apology for the wait, no explanation for standing in darkness at this godforsaken intersection. The driver faced forward and accelerated. The car's atmosphere turned viscous. In the rearview mirror, the passenger's eyes gleamed sharp yet inscrutable. He sat unnaturally erect, no slouch, no fidget, just occasional window glances that seemed to track their route with clinical precision. The driver sensed something was off but brushed it aside. Torrential rain could make anyone seem strange. Maybe the man was just tired. Yet the unease kept growing. The passenger didn't sit by the window like most would, but dead center, as if intentionally positioning himself within the mirror's constant view. No word spoken, no phone checked, no attempt at conversation. Minutes crawled by. Finally, the driver dared to speak, shattering the oppressive silence. By the way, where'd you come from? That spot was pretty remote. No response. The man stared outward, showing no reaction, no turn of the head, not even a twitch to acknowledge he'd heard, just silence. His breathing was deep and measured, yet the aura radiating from him seemed to drop the car's interior temperature. The driver swallowed hard. Dread pooled in his chest. His heartbeat outpaced the wiper's rhythm. Then, abrupt and quiet, the passenger's voice cut through. "Stop here." The driver turned, confused. "Here?" "Stop." Sharper now, a command. He pulled over onto the narrow road, nothing but forest on both sides. Before opening the door, the passenger's gaze locked onto the driver's phone still displaying the Uber app. His photo, name, and booking details. The man's hand gripped the door handle, but his body froze. Slowly, he turned his head and pulled out his own phone. The screen illuminated something the driver couldn't see. His eyes changed, confidence dissolving into hesitation, an unfinished calculation. The driver understood, knew exactly what the man was considering. Keeping his eyes forward, he spoke calmly. "Relax. I can cancel the ride. No charge." He played oblivious, feigned ignorance. Those words were a thin rope tossed into the storm. The passenger stared, long, penetrating, then finally opened the door. Without a word, he stepped out and dissolved into the rain and fog, his body merging with the night. The car accelerated faster than ever before. The rearview mirror showed only darkness, wetness, and void. The car sped through the increasingly heavy rain and fog. His fingers gripped the steering wheel tightly, slightly trembling despite his efforts to stay calm. The wipers moved quickly but couldn't completely ward off the pounding rain hitting the windshield. His breathing was heavy. He had never wanted to get home so quickly as that night. Technically, nothing had happened. No direct threat. No suspicious actions that could be reported as a crime. But his gut feeling, that feeling still clung to his spine like a cold hand that hadn't fully released its grip. The entire way back to the city, his mind kept replaying what had just happened. That man's gaze, his silence, the way he had examined the Uber app screen, how he had hesitated briefly before getting out, as if there had been an unfinished plan, something that changed at the last minute. He arrived home earlier than usual. The car was immediately parked, engine shut off, and doors locked tight. For several moments, he just sat in the dead vehicle, absorbing the unnaturally thick silence. Streetlights blinked faintly outside the window, distorted by raindrops. He took a deep breath, then exited, jogging to the front door while letting the rain soak his jacket. That night, sleep eluded him. Two days passed. Life returned to normal. He still worked his usual shifts, though the unease never fully faded. Until one afternoon, a call came through, an unknown number. The voice sounded official. Police. They mentioned a back road he vaguely remembered as the drop-off point that night. A missing person report. Last seen near the woods where he'd left that passenger. They needed his statement as the last potential witness. During the meeting with investigators, he told them everything. The route, the time, the passenger's description, even the small gestures he remembered, the silence, the stare, how the man seemed to change his mind. The police noted it all, but when asked, "Do you think he was dangerous?" he couldn't answer with certainty. Because the truth was, he didn't know, he only felt it. The following days were filled with search updates. SAR teams combed through the forest. Drones were deployed, but that night's storm had erased all traces. The damp earth left nothing but mud, no footprints, no personal belongings. The reported missing person was never found. No signals, no clues. The man he drove that night never appeared again. No new Uber requests under the same name. No CCTV footage of him on nearby roads. It was as if, that night, the two of them were the only people left in the world. Sometimes, when he drives down a quiet road on a rainy night like this, the image of that man's face resurfaces in his mind. Sitting motionless, unblinking eyes, right in the middle of the back seat. He doesn't know what the man had truly planned, but he knows one thing. He was very lucky that night. And he never picked up out-of-town passengers again. The rain had been pouring heavily since noon, hammering on the car roof with a relentless, Exhausting rhythm. The sky darkened earlier than usual. A thin mist began to form along the roadside as he crossed the city limits, heading toward his somewhat isolated home on the eastern edge of town, a quiet area surrounded by empty fields and rows of old trees lining the distant horizon. The road to his house wasn't paved, just a dirt path that turned into slippery mud during the rainy season. His tires skidded several times as he carefully drove down a small slope toward the yard. When the headlights illuminated the driveway, his eyes caught something unusual. Two fresh tire tracks cut through the mud, too recent to be completely washed away by the rain. The wide wheelbase clearly marked them as car tracks, not from a motorcycle or bicycle. He frowned, turning off the engine while studying the tracks through the windshield. No vehicle would come here accidentally. With no neighboring houses and no through road, the only explanation was that someone had deliberately driven to his property. But when he rushed from his car to the porch, nothing awaited him. No package, no flyers, not even footprints, just the raging storm that soaked his jacket within seconds. The empty yard offered no explanation for the mysterious visitor, leaving only the howling wind and his growing unease as company. He stood under the porch roof for several seconds, staring back at the muddy path he'd just come from. The tracks told a clear story. A vehicle had come from the road, approached the house, then made a three-point turn before leaving the same way, as if someone had come to inspect the house, then changed their mind. He tried to calm himself. Maybe a delivery guy, he muttered, though he knew no delivery driver would come this far just to turn around empty-handed. But he pushed the thought away. Right now, all he felt was exhaustion and the bitter cold seeping into his bones. Inside the house, he kicked off his muddy shoes and changed out of his soaked clothes before heading to the kitchen to make something warm. As water boiled on the stove, he turned on the living room TV. He kept all the lights on, not out of fear, but because rainy nights like this always made the house feel emptier than usual. Time passed unnoticed. After eating and warming up, he slumped onto the couch. The TV played to an empty room, his blank stare fixed on nothing while his mind kept circling back to those tire tracks. This house was too remote for random visits. Yet whoever came hadn't knocked, hadn't left a note, just those ominous tracks in the mud, the only proof they'd ever been there at all. At precisely 8 minutes to 8, he heard something. A knock. Just once, barely audible. He froze. The pounding rain made it impossible to be certain. Could have been the wind, or the gutter rattling. Yet he found himself standing, moving toward the front door, unlatching it slowly, pulling the handle with deliberate caution. Icy air rushed in as the door opened. The wind howled through, spraying rain across the porch tiles, but no one stood there. His eyes scanned left then right, just the darkened yard, trees swaying in the distance. Even the insects had gone silent beneath the storm's roar. He closed the door. No footprints, no shoe marks, probably just the rain, or his imagination running wild. He returned to the couch, but from that moment on, true relaxation never came. The wall clock read 9:20 when he finally rose from the couch, his back stiff from sitting too long. Though well-fed and warmed, his eyes still struggled to focus on the meaningless TV glow. He headed toward the bathroom down the kitchen hallway when, after just a few steps, he froze mid-motion. Something on the floor, behind the sofa where he'd been sitting, in that blind spot he couldn't see from his earlier position, lay a dark, elongated stain. Reddish-brown in color, not particularly large but glaringly obvious against the white floor. As he approached, he realized this wasn't just a simple stain. The texture resembled mud, mixed with something wet. Mud. He stood frozen, staring at the stain for what felt like minutes. His shoes had gone straight to the rack when he entered. He knew he hadn't walked through this area. These tracks weren't his. Crouching down, he touched the floor with his fingertips and immediately jerked back. Damp, still wet. With growing unease, he grabbed a kitchen towel and wiped the stain away. But a chill crept up his neck. How did the mud get inside? And more importantly, who brought it in? He tried rationalizing. Maybe he'd walked here unconsciously. Maybe mud fell from his shoes or pants without him noticing. Yet every explanation felt forced. The living room had been spotless when he arrived. He was certain of it. He tossed the rag into the sink, then stood motionless before the bathroom mirror. The lights remained on. The rain still drummed against the windows, yet the house's usual comforting embrace had dissolved. Something was wrong. Not anything tangible, just a visceral unease coiling in his gut, the unshakable sense of an invisible violation. When he returned to the couch, the TV's glow failed to anchor him. His attention kept fracturing, head snapping toward imagined movements in his periphery. The open floor plan stretched behind him. Kitchen, hallway, stairs, all dark, all empty. And yet the space seemed to breathe, to watch, its shadows holding secrets his rational mind refused to name. Eventually, He retreated upstairs. Each step creaked under his deliberate weight as he ascended, fingers trailing along the banister's unusually cold wood. The second floor held only two spaces, his bedroom and a small study that now stood perpetually vacant, its silence more pronounced tonight. He entered the bedroom, immediately locking the door behind him without quite knowing why, just needing control, needing walls at his back. Sitting on the edge of the bed, he focused on steadying his breath before turning on the bedside TV. Some infomercial flickered to life as he curled on his side, eyes fixed on the screen but seeing nothing, every muscle taut as a tripwire. Time passed, maybe 20 minutes, maybe more. He began to feel slightly calmer. The tension slowly dissolved along with the light voices of actors on TV. The rain still fell, but not as hard as earlier. The wind occasionally roared, but not enough to cause dread, until the sound came. A small noise, very soft, like something hitting the wall or dropping a small object. Right outside the bedroom door, he sat bolt upright on the bed, listening. His eyes stared unblinking at the bedroom door, breath held. That sound had been tiny, almost inaudible, like something shifting or being touched lightly, but enough to extinguish the comfort that had just begun to grow. He waited a few seconds. Silence. Only the sound of the still playing TV behind him. He stood slowly, stepping carefully across the bedroom floor to avoid making noise. His hand touched the doorknob. Cold. Moving slowly, he pressed his ear against the door. No sounds, no footsteps, but his heartbeat now pulsed throughout his entire body, hammering against his ribcage like a mallet. He knew if he didn't check, he'd never sleep tonight. One long breath, he opened the door gently. The hinges creaked slightly. The hallway before him was dark. The upstairs lights hadn't been turned on since earlier. He stood in the doorway, trying to adjust his vision to the darkness of the corridor. Empty. No one there, but the air felt different, as if something had just moved, like the lingering presence of someone. He stepped out of the room, his eyes scanning every corner of the hallway. Only one place left to check, the small study at the end of the corridor. He walked slowly toward it. Each step felt heavier than the last. His left hand gripped his phone while his right touched the light switch. But before he could flip it, the TV downstairs turned on. Loud, clear, that familiar sound, the show he'd been watching in the living room earlier. But he'd turned it off. He was certain. He froze momentarily. No time to think. He immediately sprinted down the stairs, his heart pounding erratically. The television's glow spilled across the living room walls. No other sounds, but the room now felt alive in all the wrong ways. He stopped at the foot of the stairs, scanning the room. No movement, no footsteps, but the atmosphere had changed, as if someone had just been there, and he'd arrived a few seconds too late to see them. He descended the stairs, walked to the living room and approached the TV. He turned off the screen using the button on its back. The room plunged back into darkness. Yet he found no peace. Couldn't. He went to the kitchen, opened a drawer, and took out a kitchen knife. Not because he was sure he'd use it, but because it was the only thing that could stop his hands from shaking. He began checking every downstairs room one by one. The dining room, the bathroom, the small storage space under the stairs. Nothing. Everything normal. No open doors. No broken windows. He stood motionless in the living room, listening to the continuing rain. Maybe this was all just a series of coincidences. Maybe the TV malfunctioned. Maybe the mud tracks were accidental. He took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. Then he turned toward the stairs. One room remained unchecked. He ascended back to the second floor. The dark hallway still waited. He walked to the end of the corridor, approaching the small study. The door was closed. He gripped the doorknob, pushed gently. The faint hallway light illuminated part of the room. Stacks of books remained undisturbed, the dusty work desk unchanged, until his eyes dropped to the floor. Something lay there, small, black. He approached slowly, and when he realized what it was, his body froze. The TV remote from downstairs. He stepped back, then 2 more steps. Then he turned and sprinted down the stairs, his breathing ragged. He threw open the front door and ran outside without a jacket, without an umbrella. The rain still poured, but the cold was nothing compared to the terror crushing his chest. His hands shook as he called the police. When they arrived, they found the back window slightly ajar, its interior lock broken. Scratch marks from a pry tool lined the frame. No one remained in the house, but enough evidence confirmed one thing: he hadn't been alone that night. And perhaps it wasn't the first time.